In terms of backtesting, what I want you to do is there's this thing called the checklist manifesto. It was basically a book written by Atul Ramonde. It's basically says that 90% of our mistakes, even though they're made by extremely intelligent people, can be prevented just by people thinking. 90% of our mistakes, even though they're made by extremely intelligent people, can be prevented just by people thinking. And the way he does this is through checklist. And examples he gives is all airplanes have checklists. Like every time before they do something, they do this checklist and check it. And it has drastically reduced the amount of mistakes. Basically, staph infection is the number one source of like deaths basically in hospitals. And they lower that by 80% by just simply instituting a checklist. So I'm going to have you go through and test the all in and open trade and kind of run you through the process that I do to trade it. So, in order to not get screwed up when you start, because this happens to everyone when we backtest, if we're going to do 100 backtest with a bunch of different filters in comparison, you're eventually going to input the wrong filters and then you'll be like, that looks weird. And then you'll go back and look at it and you'll be like, oh, holy shit, I completely put in the wrong parameters. So usually a pretty good practice when you're starting out to get better at it, for example, is you would basically be like, okay, my data set, this is what's called a read do checklist. So you read it out loud as you do the steps. So in options omega, you would basically be like, the data set is 1/1/2020 through 10/1/2024. I'm using a $1.50 put or a $1.75 put and a $1.25 call. Forex stop on each leg. I'm using leg groups. They're titled put side and call side. My portfolio is one lot on a $100,000 account. My entry slippage is 5 cents. My exit slippage is 5 cents per vertical spread, 5 cents per dollar premium. My exit slippage is 5 cents per there. I'm using all days a week, $1 commission fees, ignoring wide bid ask spreads, capping at stop loss, national bid best offer only. You can see here entry premium 175, entry slippage 110, exit premium 875 because it's 4 times that, exit premium 22 cents. So you don't have to read that out every time, but that's going to be a good practice to where you don't screw up. So even though it takes longer day by day, it's going to do it. And then I basically outlined a bunch of filters here for you to do the back test. When you
Yeah.
do the back test with those parameters, obviously these are filters and you'd add it, you know, uh,
Yeah.
like you're going to put the number of trades, the compounded annual growth rate, which will be a percentage, the max drawdown, which will be a percentage, and then the premium capture rate, which is a percentage. Does that all make sense thus far?
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was reading through that this morning and it made pretty good sense. On the trades, what is the trade?
The
What am I
trades is a
focused?
number. So, like, let's say you trade for 4 years, you have 1,000 trades. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So
Oh,
this,
I see what you're saying.
yeah. So, for example, if we were to use like a filter, or this one, it says like sub 15 VIX. So we kind of know when we put this here, even though there's five basically data sets here, this could only be 10% of the trades. You know what I'm saying? So that's
Yeah.
kind of a good value to do it. And then we'll review this next time we talk. And if you want, you can just do these on SPX dailies because it's going to be quicker for the back test to run. It'll only take 25 seconds instead of like 3 minutes. It's more that you get in the habit of doing it. And the main thing that we do here is like, okay, basically we'll go through and we'll do the back test. And once we've done the back test, we would, confirm all the parameters are right. This will basically
Hmm.
be done by you do all the back test, you see that all of the numbers are kind of similar to one another. So obviously you probably met the parameters. And definitely every time before you do a new data set, you should read this out and like re-enter in each one so you make sure it's correct.
Makes
And
sense.
once you've done that and done the data, you'll just basically write confirmed in that. So you know that you actually did that correct. And then I want you to do some critical thinking. And we can walk through a few of these ourselves right now. But for example, this one is slippage tolerance. So in regards to slippage tolerance, we always talk about implied volatility minus realized volatility minus commission slippage and fees.
Yeah, yeah.
So a huge basically profitability lever of our edge is based on the slippage. So when we're doing this test, if it's $1.50 aside, we're probably not going to get 10 cent slippage, but this can basically show like if we can make money at 20 cents slippage, we can make money at 25 cents, 30 cents, 35 cents, 40 cents. We know we have some float and edge because slippage could basically double and we could still not lose money. Whereas if we were running a trade that looked really good at 20 cents slippage and then it was unprofitable, 25-cent slippage, we probably wouldn't want to run that. So that would be kind of the purpose of the trade. You know what I'm saying? So you would write
Yeah.
that in. So you're thinking critically, like, why do we have this in there? And then the conclusion is basically after you have the data and you obviously started with the purpose at the beginning, you could be like, okay, our conclusion is that this trade is a good trade because even if we doubled the amount of slippage that we assume with 25 cents on the back test, the trade is still profitable, for example.
Yeah.
So now we're kind of knowing the why behind it. And then we go to the next step. So we can kind of walk through this one. So, first thing is what's the VIX? Do you know how to explain that to me?
The VIX is volatility, correct? Is that
The VIX
volatility in the
is
market?
a kind of like a back of the napkin calculation of the volatility of the SPX. So the VIX index by the books is the volatility index of the SPX, which is what we trade. So
All right.
you're correct. The VIX is volatility, but basically it uses option pricing from the SPX, which is what we trade to determine what that volatility measure is. So if the VIX is higher, is volatility lower or higher when the VIX is 30 instead of
If
15?
it's 30%, it's gonna be a lot higher than if it's like if it's like 0.3, it's gonna be a lot higher than it is if it's like 0.05 or something like that. It
Correct. It's on an absolute scale. So the higher the
Yeah,
number, the higher the volatility.
exactly. That's what I'm trying
Um,
to say.
so showing this with three slots that it's sub 15, 15 to 18, 18 to 21, and 30, what do you think the purpose of back testing these five ranges would be?
Just it's going to be dependent on the market. So like if the market is, let's say the VIX in the market right now is 15, like how is this back test going to perform when the VIX is at that versus when the VIX is at 25 to 30, basically.
Correct. We're basically seeing like, does this trade need high volatility to work? Or it's what I like to call an evergreen trade. So the
All
reason
right.
it's called an evergreen trade is because deciduous trees, they lose their leaves in the winter, so they don't have leaves all the way around.
Yeah.
So basically, it'd be a deciduous trade if it only worked when the volatility was above
All
20,
right.
because that's only half the time. Whereas it's an evergreen trade because evergreen trees never lose their leaves. So in winter, evergreen trees have leaves. In summer, evergreen trees have leaves and they're green, except for in California where they turn brown and light on fire. But for the most part, they're evergreen. So now that you know that, let's say there's two scenarios here and you can basically explain it to me. So you do the purpose first, you would do your redo checklist, set the
Yeah.
parameters are right, and then you would input your data. So let's say this is example one. So if this was the PCR here, what would your conclusion be if these were the results of the back test? Now, do you remember what PCR is?
Premium capture rate.
And that means what?
Basically just how much premium we're collecting on each trade.
No, it's how much P&L you get per dollar of premium you
Oh,
sold.
all right.
So
P&L per dollar. All
P
right.
so PCR, yeah, PCR is P&L per dollar sold of premium. So
Mm,
premium is what you get when you open the trade. So if you
perfect.
saw this, what would your conclusion be about this trade?
It only works when it's low volatility. Or it works the best when it's low volatility, but as volatility increases, it starts working less and less.
Yeah. So maybe here you'd be like, this trade is better suited for low vol. Um, don't trade when the VIX is above 30.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? And then another thing you could do with this too is to like, I have all years here because I want a big data set. The
yeah,
zero DT data set goes back to 2016. But then I also have SPX dailies here because the thing we want to know here is obviously the current environment, since SPX trade 5 days a week, is better.
Mm,
Like the market today is more similar to 2022 and 2023 than it is 2016.
yeah.
So if you did this exact same test and the SPX dailies is a function and options omega, you just click on and it'll populate the data set for you. And then all of a sudden, what if the data set was like this in dailies?
Then would I
What
conclude that
would
that
what
would
would your
be
conclusion be now?
it's an evergreen trade?
Exactly. And what was the difference that you learned between these two trades?
Um, is maybe the 2000. I'm trying to put it into words, but with the new market, when now that we can trade, 5 times a week, like this is a more accurate version of what it's actually going to perform like in the market today.
Yeah. And the other thing too is like in 2016, the S&P was 2,000 and now it's
Yeah,
almost 6,000. So if we're collecting a
exactly.
dollar of premium, that means two really different things. You know what I'm saying? So
Hmm.
the other thing when you come to a conclusion is you could be like, okay, like what if I tested like less premium in 2016? Like would I get similar
Mm,
results? And this ultimately is so this is just a logic chain that I just put here. Like we're not going to filter out days of the week, but for example, if we had a trade where 100% of the profitability, like let's say it was like this 90%, 0, -10, -25, -50. No trades really have this.
yeah,
But if this were to happen, we'd be like, okay, we don't want to trade this because it's all coming from one day. Like there's
I see what you're
weird
saying.
going on. But this isn't necessarily the purpose of it, isn't necessarily for you to just be clicking on it and do it and just write a conclusion. This is giving you the ability to start to recognize patterns. So if you saw this, then maybe you go back to options omega. So let's say you saw something like this, and then all of a sudden you look at it. So for example, with this trade,
Yeah,
you're like, okay, all the money was made in 2022.
yeah.
So this is how you kind of look at it. So the whole point is this back test is supposed to prompt your curiosity to look at certain things in here. So if we
Hmm.
can see, okay, this doesn't work in 2024, that's kind of concerning, you know? So then
Yeah.
maybe you go in the trade log and you say, okay, what's been happening in 2024? Or you export this and you look on Excel and you're like, okay, where are my losses coming from and why? So you can start to look at stuff and more curiosity to that, or you could be like, what if I, changed the parameters to $2 now? And this is
Yeah.
kind of so this is what I want to prompt with the exercise more than anything else is
Not just the conclusion, it's the pattern of thinking.
yeah, because I basically what I'm trying to do is I've given you a test that I know the results are going to go.
Hmm.
So I've left breadcrumbs to get you 90% of the way there. And like rationally, you'll critically think a little bit that you should probably get to the same result as me. Or next time we talk, when you've struggled through it, you've come to the main result. Because by doing this, what we're going to do is we're going to create a circumstance where we can see what your constraint is. So
Hmm.
your constraint may not be your critical thinking yet because you just start fucking up on backtesting.
Yes.
So by you copying a backtest and not like critically going down this path, even though I know where it's going to end, so this is like a better way for you to learn, we're going to determine where your weak point is quick. Because like if you sit on here and test and you can't get options omega to work, like we just kind of have a problem there. Like we're
Yeah.
we're too far
100%.
down the line, so like let's get there. And like you have more resources now to effectively resolve that or ask questions why that are lower level, which basically makes a better use of just time in general for whatever that constraint is. Or maybe you're good at testing but then when you make your conclusions, even though you can input the numbers in the backtesting software, you don't really understand critically where that step is. So then we can address that portion of it. So that's kind of, I guess, the near term homework for you to do. And like I said, if you want to use SPX dailies, that's completely fine. I'll also give you a hack here. So if we go back to the presentation here, if we test a trade, for example, this trade is running since 2020. Okay, it's going to take 75 seconds to run. So this is a waste of time if you're sitting in your room by yourself. You're effectively getting zero value added and you're just waiting for time to pass.
Hmm.
So the best practice if you want to do these quick is if you duplicate this tab, which can be done with basically a hotkey. So like once you're on here, it's always going to duplicate this test. So it's uber important that we have the correct parameters in here because then we're just going to be multiplying it and not checking it. So this is where the redo checklist does. Open trades at 3 o'clock every day, but basically this is still running. But while you're doing that, you could basically, get the VIX filter here. This one was below 15. You can go 15 to 18. So now you're running two tests right now simultaneously. You can duplicate it again and you can go 18 to 21. So now we're doing three times the work on the same side. So
I love
this
that.
is, for example, 200 back tests. This would take you for fucking ever if you're actually waiting for it to load like this. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But since you're duplicating it and doing that, we can get more work done in less of the time. Or other thing you can do is like if one of the data sets looks off in the back test that you just recorded, you can just sit there and think about what the other one, like, why is that wrong? You know what I'm saying? Or like you could be doing your conclusion while a back test is running.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's the best way to do it because you're starting out. So maybe you want to just sit there and think. So I'm not really going to justify that for you, but
No, that makes
you're
sense though.
you're probably going to get the hang of it within a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I like that a lot. How on the duplication of the link, can I just copy and paste that link into a new tab and it's the same? Is that the exact same thing you're doing? Like as the test is running, I just
You
copy and
can,
paste it.
yeah, you can paste the link, but if you right click and say duplicate, it just
This
automatically
does the same.
send
All
it
right,
with the new link. So like
perfect.
you would have to click plus copy and paste in the link. It would load and do it, so it would just take longer.
Makes sense. That's
Yeah.
dope. Yeah, I think that'll allow me to do it a lot more efficiently. But I love this. This pumps me up because I thought that Excel spreadsheet was really cool, but to be able to see that, I think it's gonna like help me learn this at a much higher rate. I really do.
Yeah, and this process is like a more dumbed down level than
Yeah.
the navigation presentation that I gave. So if you go to the YouTube and watch how to create a systemic options portfolio, if you rewatch that, that's effectively the task I'm asking you to do. So
Mm.
it'd probably be worth rewatching that, or like if you're in the car driving to work, you could listen to it, and that would kind of give you like an insight into what that is. Um, but this is ultimately what it comes down to is like back testing is kind of a volume game. Like you only get good at it from doing an insane amount of back test and then messing up. The just key underlying factor is that you're gonna mess up. It's just how many times are you gonna make that mistake before you learn it and actually make it happen. So this is also why it's good that you'll just be basically getting paid more off of a P&L instead of just an
Yeah.
hourly thing. So you're going to be pissed when you spend an hour doing this and then you just realize that all of your back tests are wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like that is and it sucks.
No.
Like, but that's why I've given you the redo checklist because like if you read and do that, you shouldn't really make mistakes. But there's obviously a balance between spending 45 seconds to read what you're doing and then actually having the back test doing it. But you'll
Yeah.
start to like catch these patterns quicker.
No. I mean, I think this is gonna make a lot better content too because I think it's gonna bring the emotion into it rather than me just looking at a trade and
Yeah,
saying
I
it's
want you I want you to get pissed. And then the other thing you'll realize too is it's mentally kind of straining and a lot of people, based on what they do in their day-to-day jobs, unless they're an engineer that like works on CAD, it's a type of mental strain you're like out of shape of or you're not used
Oh,
to. So if you do it for 45 minutes and that's kind of like your end, you'll notice you'll just start fucking up a lot, and then basically like your critical thinking's done. So
yeah,
you'll get in better shape as you get along the line of doing that. So like for example, I can do an entire market day now of just
yeah,
this with like no sounds, and I don't really drop off with my ability to think. It took like
yeah.
4 years to get that much endurance.
Oh,
But when I
100%.
first started, I could only do it for like 90 minutes or something.
Yeah, when we started this back in July, I remember like after I listened to like navigation or I would read those the letters like the trading letters that you had me read and all that stuff like by about 45 minutes to an hour in I was like, dude, I
It
can't
takes a
even handle all
while.
the
It's a
information.
different side of your brain. It's like creativity and critical thinking. Um,
Yeah,
so it takes a minute.
yeah, the intake is what I realized, like the intake and processing of the information that you're giving, because you're right, it's so mathematical and there's so there's just so many filters just to even understand the back testing and the filters was insane. So yeah, I'm excited though. I think it's going to be really interesting to
Yeah.
see how this grows and see where this is in 2 to 3 months.